Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this Saturday morning show. And today we are going to look at the millennial landlord and how you could really help your child build their own buy-to-let business, and a lot earlier on in life than you actually think. I think a lot of people have this misconception about, when they're children and not thinking about their future from that very birth point. And Jim, you talk quite a lot about setting up pensions for kids from birth and everything as well. So this kind of falls in line with that.
Yeah.
And I mean, think and imagine if your child was already financially independent by the time they were, say, 25. I mean, how proud would you be of them, and how would that make you feel? And knowing that you influenced that, and it's quite a good standpoint, especially in today's world, to be financially secure that early on in life is a good feeling for anybody. And I think particularly we've got a massive shortage of housing in the UK, and especially rentals. And rents are being pushed higher and higher, as we've seen over the last 12 months. And this means more private landlords are urgently needed within the sector to help this housing issue. And buy-to-let is the ideal business to begin, and at a young age as well. So I think really your child, if you think about them, they could buy their property as soon as they turn 18. And starting with something that's quite low value, with a higher yield, and then they could slash the cost by of getting going and earn some excellent short-term returns. And then, as we talk about the wealth creation and things quite a lot, is then once they start to bring that money in, reinvest and keep building the portfolio from there. I mean, Jim, is this something you think that people should really consider a lot earlier on in life from themselves and their children?
I'm not really sure. With the advent of the property market and the way it's going, in terms of where the market is right now, it's whether you should invest in property or not at this point in time. I mean, you know yourself, the Scottish government and the UK government are quite draconian and towards landlords just now. So you've got to really think about, is it really worth it? Could they actually make more money elsewhere or a better return? And for example, in a pension, could running their own business and having their SaaS connected to it be a better return as well? So yeah, we're going to talk about helping your child build a buy-to-let business. I mean, it's easy for me now actually to transfer the shares I've got in one of my companies because the balance sheet shows nil value. But there's a portfolio in there of round about 3 or 4 million,
which generates a lot of money as well.
Yeah, it's generating the money, but on the face of it, transferring it wouldn't actually cause a capital gains issue at this point in time, because there is no intrinsic value to it as far as the Inland Revenue is concerned, because the debt is equivalent to the actual asset, which isn't technically true. But on paper it is, because it's weird. It's weird for me to think that the way a buy-to-let business is viewed is it's only worth what the property is worth minus the debt, and actually minus a certain amount taking off because it's got tenants in it, and therefore when you go to sell it, you've not got a bigger market, so the value of the property is actually less. When it's weird because in commercial property, where the property is actually commercially valued and commercially identified as a commercial asset, it gives it intrinsic value because it's now based on the value of the rent return you can get to determine the value of the property overall. Whereas it's not in residential buy-to-let property market. It doesn't work like that. Whereas in America, when you look at the huge organizations that have built buy-to-let units, like 600 in a block, they're specifically zoned for that purpose and nothing else. So it follows the same rules as in the UK about the intrinsic value. The higher the rent is, the higher the value of the property, because it gives you a bigger return. That's how it's viewed.
Is that kind of like forced appreciation? No.
Yeah, effectively that's what it is. It's forced appreciation.
And
if you got £1,000 rent and it determines the value of the property is worth £1,000, 100,000.
Yeah.
If you get the rent up to £2,000 rent, then and it's locked in a commercial contract, then by all means, the value of the property is now 200,000.
Yeah.
And yet
Yeah.
that doesn't work in buy-to-let like that. And it's because you've got PRTs, which are fixed tenancies forever, but that property could actually be zoned for anything else at any point in time after that. So somebody could put it up for sale, evict a tenant, and actually put it on the open market and get the higher value than it would with an incumbent tenant in it. Because if you've got
Yeah.
an incumbent tenant in it, what demand? There's not a bigger demand for an incumbent tenant being in a property than there is for an open market value for first-time buyers wanting it, for downsizers wanting it, for upsizers wanting it as well.
Mhm.
So there's a bigger market there. So hence the reason why the value of the property is actually the market value. Whereas if it's got a sitting tenant, it's deemed as to have less of a value.
Which is
And Shawbrook
interesting.
and
Yeah.
and Allmore and Nationwide or the Mortgage Works and Birmingham Midcars all work on that principle. They actually take about 20% off of the property to do their numbers on their risk assessment in case there's a fire sale. Now, that isn't a fire sale. You're going to ask me, what is a fire sale? And let's talk about what is a fire sale then. A fire sale isn't when your property goes on fire and then you have to sell everything cheap. It's nothing to do with that at all. A fire sale is if you've got to exit quickly. It's just an analogy. If you've got to exit a market quickly and you've got to sell a portfolio, if you've got 20 properties all at once to one buyer,
That reduced rate. Yeah.
yeah, often that's what causes. Now I've got one going through the now. It's valued at 516,000, and I'm getting it for 400,000.
It's okay.
And I'm only getting it for that because the numbers work there. It doesn't
Yeah.
work at 516. There's no way it works like that. And the person needs to exit for various reasons, and tax reasons, and capital gains reasons, and all the rest of it. Section 24 more than likely.
Yeah.
But that's where my numbers work, and I could make that easy exit for them. And they bought them years and years ago, so they are getting a gain on it anyway. So they're capitalising out of that as a result. But there's I suppose you can call it, there's rich pickings out there if you know what you're doing. If
Yeah.
you understand what you're doing and how to do it and how to negotiate a deal, because it's not that simple. How to convince someone that the value of their property to
It's lower
you
than what
is
they
a
want.
lot less. It's significantly less, more than 20% less than what it's actually truly worth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's the skill that you need to help your child build their own buy-to-let business. If you
Yeah.
don't have that knowledge and expertise, how are you supposed to teach them? Because you would have done it already, wouldn't you?
I think it's like we spoke about this last week on or was it just Monday on the Wealth Creation Show about passing on, passing the baton on and passing your knowledge on to your children and things. And if you're wanting them to get into buy to let and become landlords, things, you need to educate them and make them aware. A lot of what you just demonstrated, obviously, it's not all straightforward. And sometimes you might need to think, it might not. It's like anything. It's like any family business or something that you're trying to pass on. It might not be for your child. They might not.
Yeah.
They might not take to it the same as you or feel the same. And being a landlord and an investor isn't for everyone. And it's
They
not
might
for the
want nothing to do with it. This is why you have to build a business with them. So basically, they're not tied into it. I mean, if they want to do it themselves, fair enough. You can teach them how to do it, and they can learn how to do it over time if they start off with one or two. But if they're not wanting anything to do with it, but you still want them to have a side hustle, so they've got income coming in, then this is probably the show for you to watch. I mean, let's be honest, I've done it, and I'm doing it still now.
Still doing it,
So, and I'm even discretionary trusts. I was reading up again about it this morning. It's about 6% every 10 years of the value of the discretionary trust itself. And then you're 39.75% or something like the dividends if it's paid to. You're a different rate if it's anything else that's paid into the discretionary trust. So you've got to work out all these intricacies and the dynamics of doing that. But what we're going to talk about here is simplistic in that shape and form. And it's just getting them started for the first time, I suppose. So whether you're actually that experienced landlord or investor or whatever it is, you can help your child on their rental investment journey. And this is what I'm teaching Tony I mean, I've not even approached it with Ben and Scott just now, because it's like, let's just get Tony on track, because Tony, my daughter, is, she's an accountant in background.
The numbers
She's
girl,
finance as well. She's very structured what she's doing, and she likes dealing with property, but she doesn't like dealing with people. So she loves the fact that it's managed by you guys.
Yeah,
that's why, because she doesn't want to deal with the tenants, but she loves dealing with the numbers and counting the money.
Yeah, and it's good to have her in the background because she's brilliant at that side.
No surprise why she always wanted a till for Christmas, so she could count her money, and she loved counting money all the time. There's no surprise. So it's a bit strange, and funny enough, that's how I am as well. I'm that wired as well. I like the aspect of accumulating wealth, but you also have to use it for something. There's no point in being the richest man in the graveyard, when you pop your clogs. That's not really successful at all. So it's all about educating. It's all about doing all these different things. And this is what the blog's all about. This is what the show is all about this morning. So you've got to then, where do you first start? This is the first question that most people are going to ask us. And it's really about helping your child save a deposit of some sort. Now, I've done that with the boys. So what they do is they put a certain amount aside every single month. Come hell or high water, they're putting 200 quid away every single month.
Yeah.
Disciplined. Now, they've been doing that for 5 years, and they've got it in a first-time buyer ISA. So they're now at the maximum, which is 12,000, and they'll now get £3,000 off the government when they go buy their first house. The two of them.
Yeah.
So they're getting instantly that uplift of 3,000 quid just for saving £12,000. How great is that for your first house? Now, you're obviously not meant to be using that on buy-to-let property when you're buying it, but it allows you to buy your first house, and you've got that huge tax-free lump sum that you get with it. But they're still continuing to do after it. They're still continuing to save £200 a month, irrespective of that, because they've been conditioned into that, and they've not relied on that income.
Yeah, and that's indoctrinating really, habits that are good habits to be able to save and continually do that each month, like you say, come hell or high water. Because it's easy to deviate when you try and put savings aside, and people fall foul of it quite a lot. But yeah, helping to save for the deposit and things. What a bit like banking mum and dad has become a lot of first time buyers' way forward recently to get onto the property ladder, and whether that's for themselves or whether it's buy to let or whatever. So I mean that tends to be quite a lot of the time where children are turning when they get to that age. But there are various different ways where you could give them a helping hand. Obviously, the most simple way is to gift them the entire deposit, but that's not the only solution.
What I did with Tony.
Yeah.
So when Tony went to buy her first house, I gave her a significant amount towards her first property. Now, you'll get a lot of people out there right at this point in time, maybe tuning in and saying, well, I can't afford to do that. It says, well, you have to discipline yourself to do it. And if you're starting it for the first time as a parent, and you've got a young child, or you're planning a family, then you have to start doing it now. You have to start putting away. This is all about wealth creation as well. This is all about, being disciplined enough to actually put some money aside for the future, for your children. It strikes me as a complete travesty that people will have children, right? And then they'll make no provision for their future. And it's like, is there no something in there where you think you're responsible for them at some point in time if you're having children? Or do you think you should just pop a child out and go, right, okay, fend for yourself?
No.
So gifting an entire deposit, you're right. It's but it's really not the only solution as well. There's other solutions. So what other solutions do you have? What have we got?
Obviously, gifting the deposit is something, if you're in that position to do so, is something that you could do. You could also, alleviate their situation, let them live with you. I know the boys live with you, Jim, and that will save them on rent and higher bills, and allow them to pay money and into a savings account, like you say, Jim, and build up that deposit on their own. Because you've took that weight off them, off the responsibility, because once you've got your own place, there's a lot of bills and a lot of things that go with that.
Yeah.
Let me play devil's advocate.
Yeah. Let me play devil's advocate, because I can hear people saying out there, do you charge your children any money for staying in the house and food and all the rest of it? Even though they've got full-time jobs, absolutely not.
in order to give them
Sorry?
that.
What? What about the discipline of making sure they pay? It's like, why would I be charging them money that I don't need? I don't need it. It's like, you know, it's fine. They can just stay here. It's not costing me any more for them to stay here. This would be my house anyway. So the only extra that's costing them is the electricity they use and then the food that they have. And that's it. There's nothing, there's no other cost to that.
But
So
then
if I
even
can
though,
afford it, why would I not afford it? I grew up in a group where the older generation helped the younger generation. And I mean, a simplistic form is every time you went out for a night out, the older generation would always pay the bills.
Mhm.
They would go, no, put your money away, son. So no, it's no, you're no paying for that. You need your money as much as possible. We'll pay for that tonight. And that's
Mhm.
how the older generation that I grew up in, my father's friends and stuff, and people like that around about me, they all said, no, no, no. And Elaine's granddad and grandmother and gran and everything like that was like that as well.
Well,
It's
same,
like, no,
yeah.
no, put your money aside. Your money's no good here. It's like, you know, we'll pay for it. You need your money as much as possible when you first start out. And that's the most important thing, because that is the wealth that will compound later on, provided they actually save it. So it's a classic example about being disciplined enough to say to yourself, if somebody goes, well, no, no, put your money aside, I'm going to pay that bill for you. I tell you what, I'll put that in there, save that then.
Mhm.
So it's like I've spent it, but I've actually put it aside to save it in some sort of fund. So that's a disciplined way of doing it if you're starting out as a young person, and people pay the bills for you when you were expecting to pay them. So you had the money to do it. So just put that money aside then. Don't go, oh, I've got more money, I'm going to spend it on something else now.
Yeah. But obviously, there is an element of discipline in that. Whether you've got your children staying with you and you're not maybe charging them rent or digs, is what we call it, and things.
How
But
will they
then,
learn?
but then you've got
How
that
will they
element.
learn these discipline
You've
things?
got that
Like,
element of discipline in there because you have got them paying into their. Do you know that part of
yes,
the deal is they're paying into that savings
they
account?
don't need to go through the torture that you went through when you were younger just to
Mhm.
prove a point that that's what it's like. They
Yeah.
don't need to. I mean, if you broke your leg, would you break their leg as well, just to make them feel what it's like? No, you wouldn't. So why would you do it financially for them? It's like, oh, you've got to go through the struggle. You've got to understand what it's like. Why? Do they need to? Is it really important? Oh, because when you're skint, it's like, what, you're expecting them to be skint then? Think about that, what
Yeah.
you're programming into your children. If you're actually saying to them, you're going to go through a struggle, what do you think's going to happen to them in their psyche? Oh, I'm going to go through a struggle.
Mhm.
So they then begin to struggle because the expectation's there. Whatever you expect happens as a result of that, as a natural result of that. Yeah, if they do struggle at some point in time, then they'll deal with that at the time. But it's very unlikely if you help them at the very beginning.
Mhm. Yeah, and if you've got that mindset and then you
They
obviously
lead by
demonstrate
example.
that in front of them, it just indoctrinates it into them, and that's how they'll feel
It's called
subsequently.
leading by example, Richard.
Yeah.
Lead by example and show your children by example. You don't need to tell them because they're watching you right now. If you're down the pub every single night, guess what's going to happen to them?
Yeah.
Hey, if it's like, oh, I've led a good life, didn't judge me. It's like, I'm not judging you. I'm just telling you that's what happens. It's up to you to do what you want to do.
Yeah. Also, I think when we talk about the savings account and things, well, some people might want to. Do you know if people have got children and they're committed to their savings account and things, then they could match it even up to pound for pound,
Yeah.
and that gives an extra incentive for them to then continue saving, and then ultimately, that really then gives them more equity to put into a home.
Absolutely. Now, what do we do so far? We've always done the pensions from very early age, from almost
Mhm.
birth with some of them. So we've always done a certain amount every single month. Tony's £77. No, Tony's 77, yeah, because she was older. Ben's £33 and Scott's £44, or vice versa. And it's always been that case from
Mhm.
years and years and years. We've always put that money into their pension. And they've topped up their own pension as well to the maximum at the end of every single year, to the maximum you can be allowed for, basic rate. There's no point
Yeah.
in putting higher rate if you're not going to get the deduction. You only use that at the time, or unless you're wanting to accumulate wealth, you can put more aside. But you're better to have it in a short-term deposit account. The other one as well is what Rory Hogg used to tell me this. Rory said he started his kids off and said to them, go and get a job, a part-time job. And it's like, oh, Dad, but it's only like £1.50 an hour. What am I? He says, but that's okay. You get that job and I'll match it.
Yeah.
So if
And
you get
that's
£1.50 an
yeah.
hour, I'll pay you £1.50 an hour. So if you're making 35 quid a week, obviously that tells you how long ago that was. You're making 35 quid a week part time. I'll give you 35 quid a week as well. And that was a like for like. And then they would do what they needed to do with it. And that was a way to discipline them. But more importantly, it was a great way to teach them a work ethic. Without what you get round about you is everybody moaning about the fact that, oh, you're underpaid. It's like, hey, you've got to start somewhere. You've got to start somewhere. And if it need be, you know, this is why America has a lot of interns, you know, that actually don't get paid at all.
Yeah,
And they have to apply to work, you know, at people like Goldman Sachs and all these investment houses that go in and they don't get paid at all, and they work for 6 months, and they might get a full-time job out of it and they might not, but they get a huge amount of experience as a result of that.
Yeah.
And then they can walk into any other place and be start as an investment manager there. So you've got to think about these things. You can't sit there and moan about it. I mean, we're getting on the wealth creation stuff, but this is a way of getting your children to understand how to discipline themselves with finance and understand how to save as well. So as well as helping your children in property ownership when you're doing this, it incentivizes them to save, and actually seeing the results will give them valuable skills in financial management that they can use forever. This is back to saying, if you give a man a fish, he will eat for a day. If you teach a man to fish, he will eat for life. We're teaching our children to fish.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, they're all really good ways to teach good life skills and things. But yeah, I mean, helping them save for that deposit and all the experience and things that they could learn along that way is definitely something that you need to think about with your children. But a buy-to-let, I mean, example, I mean, while we look at buy-to-let as much better viewed as maybe the long-term investment strategy, there are some short-term ways to get that first maybe 2 or 3 properties that can really set a child or anyone up for life, I suppose. And the key is to look at probably the yields rather than the long-term capital growth. And in areas of Scotland and things, and indeed Wales and England and things as well, that currently offer around yields around like 9% and things in some areas, are a great way to build saving pots, and then that allows them to do their next purchase, and then create that momentum. What's the smile for?
I'm laughing because there was a blog last night that somebody was saying, it's like, oh my God, look at the returns you can get. And they were talking about a yield of 7%. And I just went and calculated a yield on the towers I've got, one of the properties, and it's like,
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
it's over 15%.
that was always a good one. It was always a good one.
But the landlord just wanted rid of it, and I'm like, why would you want rid of this? The tenant loves the place, they look after it, and the rent will go up over time. And it's like, oh my God, I'll buy it then. I'll just buy it. It's like, it's a no-brainer.
I think with that one, she did have a bad tenant in there that caused her a wee bit of problems. And I think that kind of put her off. But that tenant that went in, I put him in, and he's a brilliant
It's
tenant.
not just that one, Richard.
She
If
gave
you
up.
get this right, this is why I never even went on to say, God, 7%. I wouldn't even bother about that, to be honest. It's like I'd be looking for 15 plus in return on investment. And then you get the people saying, oh, you'll never get 15 plus, and prove it. It's like, I'm not bothered. I'm not getting into that thing and all the rest of it about how it is. But you're right, when you sit and talk about this in general, people are actually looking for 7% and they're going, yeah, this is fantastic. It's like, no, I want to make sure that I'm hedged against everything, against risk, against the occupancy rate dropping, against the tenant maybe not paying the rent, because it's a year before you'll get somebody out. If the tenant doesn't pay the rent, it's 3 months it's 3 months to serve the eviction. So it's got to be 3 months in arrears. You've got to serve the eviction, and then once that's passed, you've got to apply to the court, which is another 9 months. It's like way beyond a year, and you've got no rent for a year. Can you afford to do that? That's why you can't afford to take risks like that. And then people talk about rent guarantee insurance. It's like rent guarantee insurance only covers you for 6 months.
Yeah.
On most cases. And if you don't tick all the boxes in the beginning, then they'll not cover you at all. So you think you've got it, but you've maybe no. So check the small print. I was advising somebody. Yep, I was advising somebody last night about that. It says check the small print, because it's not worth the paper it's written on most of the time. Why do you think the insurance companies are rolling in it? Because they make sure they cover all these bases. It says by the time you tick all their boxes, you've more or less got a guaranteed You're no perfect tenant anyway. Why would you need the rent guarantee then anyway? Only reason you'd need it is if you couldn't take that financial hit for the legal fees and for the loss of rent for the first 6 months. But it's going to be a sore one if you do it. So this is why you could build up the savings pot for your next purchase. And this is why we talk about yield. But more importantly for me is cash is king. Cash flow, not cash, because cash is trash. Cash flow is king in this equation. It's the money you've got coming in every single month over and above getting the mortgage paid. So the mortgage is the most important thing. Get that paid. You need to clear a lot of money after the mortgage is paid in order to make sure you cover the overheads, like a management company. Like, for example, if you do have these voids, like for the insurance you've got to pay, and you've maybe got to refurb, or you've got to do some repairs and improvements over the years as well. These are the sort of things you've got to take into account. This is why you've got to hedge yourself against everything. Okay. But you've got an example here. Do you want to talk through that, assuming about the property price and that?
Yeah, so let's look at a kind of an example, and the figures kind of fall into where we are, and especially here in Fife at the minute. So assuming you were purchasing a property, say about 80,000, now you've got your 25% deposit you need to put down for a buy-to-let mortgage, so that's 20,000. So then you've got the mortgage left, which would be 60,000, and repayments would work out about 255, 57, something like that a year on a month on the 35-year interest rate of about 5.14. We're probably sitting about 5.14 just now, actually, to be fair.
A 35-year term at an interest rate of 5.14%. You can fix that in for 5 years more than likely for some lenders just now. And you're right, 257. So you've got that coming in. So the initial yield, 9%, would produce the monthly rental income. So the rental income would be what?
Yeah, you're saying about 600, possibly 650, depending where you are.
So you'd have a gross profit, which is a contribution towards overheads. That's what we call it. Marginal costing, it's called. So marginal costing, it's where is the point that you've got to cover your overhead? So it's after the mortgage is paid, because that has to be paid come hell or high water, whether you like it or not, or you're in trouble. Everything else is flexible. Insurance probably has to get paid, but it's only like 150 quid a year for an 80 grand property like that. And so that's you covered for insurance. And then everything else is kind of flexible because it depends on what happens to the property. So we call it variable. So mortgage is fixed cost. You're paying it come hell or high water. Insurance is more or less fixed cost, we would say. You do have an option whether not to pay insurance, but your mortgage company probably insists on you doing it. And everything else is variable, what we call variable costs. So it depends what happens to the tenancy as it goes on, whether you actually pay or not, or whether your variable cost is a managing agent or doing it yourself. These sort of things. So it gives you what you would most people recognise as a gross profit of £343 or thereabouts. That's it. That's a good cover.
600. So if I rent at 600, you've got 343, and then as you say, Jim, you think about you've got insurance. Think about your annual safety checks.
You've got £4,000 to cover your overheads.
Yeah. And then once you take off, obviously, all these overheads like annual checks and your agency fees, your income tax, you should be left with around about the 250 per month, and that's net. That's 3,000 a year, and that's without putting rent increases or anything in place. That's just at the 600 that you've initially set it at. Yeah. So, and then the best thing to do with that is not spend it. Keep that aside, let that accumulate over maybe the course of the next couple of years. And then that gets you then in a position where you've got money put together for a deposit for your next investment. And then that's how you then look to build the property portfolio by saving.
I would err on the side of caution when we talk about these figures, about the £3,000 per year without any increase in rental values. Because for me personally, that's a bit optimistic. I usually take your 1,500 to £2,000 out every property once you've got it right. And that also this 3,000 assumes that you're going to have 12 months occupancy. Your rent's going to be paid all the time. So that's why I assume it's 1,500 to 2,000. And then you're right. You've got something else for your rental deposit, and you could put that in. You could put this money aside into a savings and an ISA and start up for a deposit and stamp duty and ADS for your next property. That's the sort of things, and assuming similar value when it comes to buying your home, this time with a 95% mortgage, there should be enough in the pot to cover all the buying costs for just about 3 years. And if you've got your home, this is an argument. I'm watching this just now on Diary of a CEO.
Yeah.
The guy actually says, "Nah, you shouldn't be buying a house anymore. You should be renting a house." And it's a really high-profile
Rather than being a homeowner. Yeah.
Yeah, and I wouldn't call him a guru. I'd call him an expert, because a guru, kind of implies that everybody's a guru. But I would say, even I've got Lettings Guru as my handle for my.
Yeah, no.
That's years ago, and I just stick with it. It's like, aye, okay then. But an expert, a financial expert, is probably good, and you could easily demonstrate why you should possibly continue to rent your house and actually continue to buy to let properties outside of that and build a portfolio while you're renting at the same time. Because the entry and exit cost of buying and selling a house is prohibitive in comparison to if you're moving from place to place and building a portfolio in other areas. You might want to then move, if you're doing it full time and refurbing, to a different location entirely in the country, and it's easy entry and exit if you're renting. Whereas if you're selling, well, you could keep the property if you're selling, but you make sure that property you bought in the first place to live in is the number's going to work if you move on and rent. But you're not going to get any money out, because you're going to end up having to put money in, especially if you've got a 95% mortgage on the property you just bought. Because then when you go to put on a buy-to-let mortgage, they'll go, no, we're wanting 25% deposit on it. So you have to put money in. And then that's going to make it even, a wee bit more challenging. So your own house is probably never the house that you'd probably rent, unless it's special circumstances and you've been in there for a long time and it's built up a huge amount of equity. So your maybe loan to value is 40%. So you could take out 35% of equity, then go and buy more property, but then rent that one, and it allows you to go around the country and rent somewhere else and actually build a portfolio at the same time. Remember that we're only talking short term here. You can change the house prices and the yields and the mortgage and the terms and locations that work for you, but it's a pretty solid plan for using for buy to let to speed up the process and owning more than one property. When I had my spreadsheet, all I did was I had a bit of paper, and I kept it with me all the time. And I went one property year one, another property year two, another property year three. Oh, year four, I can buy a property with the money I'm making on these three properties that I've just bought over the last 3 years. Okay, so I'm buying two properties the following year, and then two properties again. And then it's like, oh, I could buy three properties this year. So by the time I got up to year 16 or year 25, it's like, oh wow, I've got 30 or 40 properties now.
That's the compounding effect, yeah.
Yeah, and that's how it works. But most people get disillusioned in the first 3 years and go, oh, this is too much effort.
Because they get bored, and it's like it's like there's nothing.
I tell you what's really too much effort is working for someone else for the rest of your life for something you can't afford. That's too much effort, as far as I'm concerned. And then finding out when you get to 65 or 67 now for the retirement age, and then finding out that you can't afford to retire. You can't afford to retire because you've not built enough money up, or your pension doesn't cover you, because it's probably 2/3, if at best, of what you couldn't afford to live on in the first place.
I think there's a lot of people that are kind of in my age bracket that's going to get a big shock when they get later in life.
They're completely delusional. They think that the state's going to look after them, and they're going to be. You'd seen it right now. The amount of money, 40 billion, they're going to try and raise for the budget coming up. So 40 billion, that's going to have to come. It's going to come from companies, and the companies. Oh, it's not coming from the people. Yeah, you're taking for the companies, and the companies will have to cut back on the overheads of the people, because that's their biggest cost, in order to maintain their profit levels to pay their dividend holders, who are actually the pension funds. So see on the knock-on effect of how it has to everybody else as a result. So sitting there and glossing it up as if, yes, grammatically, we said we wouldn't take it from the people and we'll take it from the companies. It's like, okay, but yeah, you're indirectly taking it for the people anyway. Don't kid yourself. Semantics.
Yeah. But I mean, as you were talking there, as we were talking there, we talk about obviously doing the buy to let, and then you see obviously then in time having money to buy your own home. So becoming a landlord before you own your own home is something that I suppose we need to talk about. And I mean, owning your own home has become really quite a top priority for people in Britain, across the country. It's just the way people think, as opposed to how they are on the continent and obviously other parts of the world. But depending on people's circumstances, your child might be buying, it might be better buying their first property as a rental investment as opposed to buying their own home. And here's why: because they could really avoid that second home stamp duty supplement if they don't already own their own home. And that's something that people always overlook or aren't even aware of. They own their own home, they want to start doing buy to let, but they don't realise they've got to pay stamp duty, which means the costs can go towards the cost they save on that if they don't already own their home could go towards the 25% deposit that they need for the buy to let mortgage on their first buy to let, as opposed to having that additional on top because you already have a primary residence. Also, the rent income can then be used to pay for the deposit and stamp duty supplements on the next property rather than having saved it from their regular income or salary. They could use that money to then put towards, and then that has quite a positive knock-on effect, and you don't have the influence of your owning your own home affect that. Would you say that's a good strategy, or?
I would absolutely say that could be the cast iron way to build a buy to let portfolio now. Not actually owning your own home, and everybody goes up. It's rent. It's just money in the fire. No, it's not. It's the least it's the most you'll ever pay for a property. Because you're no longer responsible for the mortgage. You're no longer, so it can't go up or down as far as you're concerned. Your rent's sitting there, and yeah, it can go up a certain amount, but you could always move if there's a certain amount of supply in the area. You could have a choice to move somewhere else. You also don't pay for any repairs and improvements either. So why would you bother then? Why would you not just continue
rent as well?
And so with the extra money you're saving as a result of renting, you can then put that into a fund, which can actually fuel for the future. Whereas if you own the property, then you've got everything locked into that, and you really can't get it out unless you've stayed in it for a lot of years and built up a huge amount of equity to pull out equity in order to put into your buy-to-let. So you can do it two ways. But the thing is, then you're stuck where you are, especially if you're young. You're only in that one property then for a lot of years in order to build up that equity, or you'll be faced with paying the entry and exit cost of buying and selling again every single time, which is prohibitive. It's almost like 1 year's rent to do that. So why would you then do that then? It's more than 1 year's rent for a lot of people. So why would you then go and within a couple of years and just move again and pay another year's rent? You may as well just rent it if that's the case. The only people, you're just renting from the bank when you're paying a mortgage, by the way.
Higher cost.
Yeah. It's like, oh, I own my own house. No, you don't. The bank owns your house until you pay it off. Don't kid yourself. There's the stigma. It's the stigma, Richard. The stigma that you've not made it until you own your own house.
Yeah. And I see a lot of people, and especially like social media and things, people buying a house and then they'll sell it and move it on to something else, sell it and move on to something else, and they keep getting bigger and bigger. And I'm like, you must be shelling out a lot of money to keep moving home.
The entry and exit costs all the time, eh?
It's
for me personally, it's not a great strategy. And if you look at everybody else that's done that before, are they wealthy? No, they won't be.
They'll have a lot
Very
of debt.
Unlikely.
They'll have a lot of debt, yeah. But yeah, do it on the flip side and having buy-to-let set up first before your own property purchase. That could really boost their buying power when they do want to maybe finally buy their own home. They could combine, obviously, the savings that they've made from their buy-to-let, use some of the income that they've got coming in to obviously fund that. So while home ownership, it certainly is a dream-worthy holding on a lot of people, but becoming a landlord first could be the faster route to really secure your financial future, I think, and I think hopefully we've demonstrated that in that part of the show. I think a lot of people do think about home ownership as a status thing.
Of course,
and if you do want to own your own home, then fair enough, but do it in the right way and don't just leave yourself in a lot of debt or kind of just do it on a whim or move so frequently to try and keep getting a bigger house and a bigger house.
I would rather have certainty of financial security and knowing that I never need to be behest to anyone else because I've got the means to live on nothing, if that's the case, because I don't have a mortgage anymore. I don't have, bills anymore. These sort of things are all covered because I've built up a nest egg. So this is a classic example about some people regret not going to university or not going to college earlier on in life. And then they have the setting wind and they think, I want to go. And then they work out the financial means and think, oh, God, It's like, I've got 2 cars I'm paying for. I've got a mortgage I'm paying for. I've got, you know, something else I'm having to put away for. I've got no money. I can't afford to give up my job and actually go back to college and actually better myself so I could earn more money because I'll have more expertise.
Yeah.
And that's another thing that stops a lot of people. I actually spoke to somebody recently about this along at the East Nuke. I spoke to him at the time, and he was in his house, and he says, we really want an extra room. I went, what do you want it for? He went, oh, it was this and that. And it never really worked out how it was really essential. And I said, so what do you do with, like, oh, well, we go on holidays, we go like diving, we go, surfing, we go wind kite surfing and all the rest of it around the world. We love our holidays. We don't really want to give that up. And then we want to do this, we want to do that. And I says, well, if you buy another house, you're going to have to give something up. I says, to be honest, if you want my honest opinion, what you're living in just now, there's nothing wrong with it. It's just, I quite fancy an extra room. You'll get that extra room, and then you'll have to cut back on your holidays. You'll not be able to have your lifestyle you had before. And then as a result, you'll sit and look at that room and you'll be resentful towards it for that reason.
It's cost you
that's
that much.
Another thing. Yeah, that's another thing. You'll be completely resentful for that extra room that you got. You know why I know that? Because I've done it.
Yeah, you did do it, and then you reverted back again because you thought,
I've been paying for this room for the last 3 years because it's just the hell junk in it, and I've had to heat it, I've had to decorate it, and I've never ever used it really. It's just all my junk that's sat in there. And it's like, what was the point? And I had to pay a higher council tax ban for it as well. So all their cost just for that extra room I never even needed in the first place because I thought I might need it, and I never. So I could, once you get into that mindset of this is not about denial. This is about making proper decisions, financial decisions for your future in order to secure your financial freedom. Ultimately that's what we're all after.
Yeah. It's interesting you say about obviously you mentioned about university and things there, and you could look at possibly options as starting out as like a live-in landlord, and you might think, what's a live-in landlord?
Quite a few tenants do that. Quite a few students do that. The parents buy the property and their friends live there in the university, or they get people to live with them, and that pays the bills.
Yeah. So if you have children that are going, or a child that's going to university, and who's renting a house and they share it and whatever, you could flip that idea around, and then you could put it on its head, and then you could buy a property to live in as the landlord, with the students as lodgers as such. So your child would be there in lodgers as well, and it is quite common, and people do fairly often. Obviously, we've got St Andrews here in Fife, and that's something that I've seen happen as well. Now you get things like a university mortgage as such, or a student mortgage, and that allows students to buy a home, live in it, have lodgers, with their parents' home or savings or whatever down as
they act as guarantor.
As guarantor security, yes. So that's an option you could start out doing that.
Huge
as well.
Benefits to this is they're managing the property themselves. Their friends of the tenants or the people that they've met at university have decided to share with them and pay towards the bills. So it gives them some sort of life skills in that process about how to deal with people. Because even though they're even though they're your friends, they're not switched on as you are, and they're a different personality type. So missing the rent for a week doesn't bother them, whereas you've got to pay a mortgage, and it's like, no, I need the rent now. But I can give you it next week, no bother. It's like, I'm not caring what you're saying. You're giving me it now. See how so that will benefit them. This is teaching them to fish rather than actually just giving them everything. So we're teaching them at the same time and letting them work out. This is why failure is probably the biggest teacher and the best teacher for people when they're younger, to learn to handle failure and learn from their failures in order to succeed later on.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. The life skills that would you would learn, and that would teach anyone in that situation, because you've got the managing of the property, you've got potential emergencies, you're dealing with noise, you've got maintenance, budgeting, everything like that. It all goes hand in hand with learning these life skills, which are so important for the entire duration of your life. And it also puts them in a position where, again, they've got that option where they could put money aside and give them that responsibility of saving money, and they could obviously have that then to then further invest as they go forward, or buy their own property further down the line and things as well. So there's a lot of things that are combined within that strategy. So it could be a really good one. So as well as providing them with a home, starting out as maybe like the live-in landlord, as we say, can teach a child how to navigate life, learn about the property market, and how things work both with sales and lettings as well. Because housing and things is something, and the way things work in lettings and sales, it's not something that anybody teaches you, not at school or anything. It's something that
I think there's a great bonus to it as well, with the rent a room scheme, the £7.5 grand that you get as an allowance. I definitely think that it's so because you've got to live in and it's a furnished property. That's the criteria. You have to live in furnished property, rent a room scheme, and that's how you do. So there's a big advantage to that. How do we find out more about this? Who are the people to follow and get advice about this?
Yeah, and that was what bringing me on to like I was saying, obviously the life skills that, and especially things that you learn, you need to find the right people, and it's the inspirational people that you want to learn and follow. And as well as a great maybe entertainment and distraction, social media is quite remarkable with the amount of information and inspiration on there about becoming a landlord, how to be a landlord properly, to know how to follow the guidelines and the legislation properly, and who are the right people to speak to. Now, there are a lot of things online that you could follow, but just be careful where you get that, where you source your information from. So let's go. I'm going to go through a few things that I've come across. So James Copeland, he was renting with other students when he realised he could become an investor instead. So he bought his first property at 25, and now he runs property investment courses and things online. And he's sharing all that knowledge that he learned along the way on his journey. I'm going to talk about TikTok influencers. Be careful when you watch TikTok influencers, but many young landlords have taken to TikTok to share their strategies and encourage and inspire other people to follow suit, often using, they've got all the hashtags, and they do the short clip videos of how they turn things around, whether it's doing property flips or property rentals and things as well. And on the facade, it could all look good, but please make sure when you're sourcing information for people that they could actually back it up with their own financial status. People could give you as much information as they want, and they could be quite unsuccessful in a way, if that makes sense.
I think sometimes more of it is disingenuous. It's not really, it's deceptive to a degree. This is why, because if you're following people like that, yes, you can take the advice and information of them, but you've got to then ask yourself, why are they actually telling me that? Who would tell you how to make money? Why would they do that? Why would anybody tell you how to make loads and loads of money? Well, for the purpose of transparency, is when we tell people, it's like you might come to use our agency, you might use our sourcing services, and you might use our services as a result, because damn fine it, we're probably the most knowledgeable people in the buy-to-let market at this point in time, in the whole of the UK, to be honest. Because I've been in it for 30 years, and I'm probably one of the biggest landlords in the UK.
People may wonder and worry, like, why are you giving out so much free information? And anything, while we do it, we educate ourselves and educate each other and things as well, but we educate other people. And if people want to use us, then that's ultimately the kind of upsell, if you want to call it. But there isn't really an upsell. It's if you use us, use us. You don't. We do this purely for the
one of the best people I need to speak about is Martin Lewis. Great source of independent advice on all things money, including some excellent tips on where to save cash for the best returns and actually ease of access as well. There is people out there. I personally learn, because they're obviously a higher profile level and they've got higher wealth and they've got higher knowledge and expertise in terms of what they're doing. I learn really dire of a CEO from all these people that have written all the right, and if they've written a good book, which I think is knowledge and expertise in their field, and I think that will benefit me in terms of the pursuit of continuous knowledge and being a continuous student in life and life skills, then I'll get that book and read it. Definitely. An interesting one lately, I was, an audience with Rick Astley. So in Glasgow, and he was talking about his childhood and how that affected him and how everything else affected him as a result of that. And so I've got his book and I will read it, because success leaves clues. And what his success is, maybe in the music industry, but the same attitude and the same perseverance and the same sort of the mindset is similar to every single mindset in every other venture that you could name. You know, whether it's in fashion, whether it's in having your own business, whether it's in investment strategy, whether it's in property, whether it's in crypto, even if it's in currency exchange, anything like that. It's the same attitude to everything. Even if it's in your job, it's in your career progression, it's the same attitude. Just because these people run their own businesses and they build multiple businesses, the same attitude would apply to you in your job if you listened and plugged yourself into these types of systems and listened and took that on board and adapted it to what you do. This is what people do not realize. There's a wealth of experience out there, and it is literally free. Have I gone to any of their courses? No. Have I bought some of their books? Absolutely. 10 to 15 quid for a book that you've got for the rest of your life, which is about skills that you'll need for the rest of your life. You can read it again and again and again and again, and you'll still get something different out of it, because your life's journey as you go through changes. You know, you're not the same person you were now as you were 5 years ago or 10 years ago, or at school for that matter. You're not the same person. You've acquired more knowledge and expertise and skills as a result of it, if you have, and you're probably a lot further along in your journey as a result of that. So this is why you follow inspirational people, for that reason, because you never know what you're going to learn from them. And there's often a misconception. It's like, because you're hearing it for free, you treat it like that. You don't value it.
Yeah.
And this is the mistake a lot of people make. They don't value free information. They don't understand. The free is to get you into a system, which obviously you will use their services possibly one day, and that's fine. But there's still a lot of free information which is completely relevant. Hence the reason why I go to a lot of free courses, you know, just as introducers, to see if I can gain a wee bit of knowledge and expertise and information on something which will actually help me further forward, or maybe later on.
Yeah, there's a lot of free information out there that could be really useful to anyone, and it doesn't matter what you're doing. And like you say, Jim, there's a lot of different avenues which people could be doing. It doesn't have to be property investment. We obviously just cover that quite predominantly because it's what we're involved in.
Do you know why? Let's just finish off here. Do you know why so many people feel they will never own a property? Do you know why?
I would say probably because of the financial point of view that they're in at the moment.
No. It's because the media's told them that.
Yeah, they've led them to believe that. Yeah, that makes sense.
They're all going around telling themselves, looking at each other, going, yeah, we'll never own a property, we'll never own a property. And then if you take a look at your finances and sort themselves out when they're financially and budget them properly, and the budget properly, it's like, no, you could own a property if you want. It's just that you have bought into somebody else's vision of what your life's going to be like. You need to become the master of your own destiny, not let anybody else take control of that. And that's what they're all doing. They're letting the media take control of their mind. They're letting them decide for them. They're letting them convincing them that you can't afford the property. You get them, they roll them out all the time on the telly. It's like, oh, I'll never afford the property. So what's your circumstances? I'm on the dole. I'm not surprised you'll never afford the property because you're on the dole.
Yeah.
What planet or what equation or what lifestyle choice has ever led you to believe that you could own a property being on the dole and not actually being on benefits? It's impossible. But there's this sort of thing about, just because you are you have an entitlement to own a property. No, you don't. You've got to work for it. You've got to be savvy enough. You've got to plan for it. You've got to budget for it. You've got to make certain sacrifices sometimes. You know, that holiday you always wanted maybe has to be put to the side and delayed gratification, so you can get the house that you always wanted. Because the house is going to accumulate more in value. The holiday is going to be experience. You can have loads of experiences later on in life. You don't need to have it all now. Instant microwave society. I want it now. Ping. It's like, oh, it's there. And just like a genie out of a bottle, you know, appearing right in front of you. It's like, you know, just like that.
Yeah, you
like
do.
Just like that.
That was Tommy Cooper.
That's Tommy Cooper for the older generation.
Yeah, I remember Tommy Cooper. My granddad liked Tommy Cooper. But yeah, you're absolutely right. The younger generation do, you see it quite a lot, and the experiences and things that they're doing at such a young age that must cost an absolute arm and a leg.
Yes.
The way
The older generation convince them as well, because the older generation, the peers that they're supposed to look up to, actually convince them as well, because they're indoctrinated into that system about you'll never own your own house. You know, young people will never get. By the way, 25 to 34-year-olds, the percentage that actually own their own home, whether it's with a mortgage or outright, is 35.5%. So a third of them, more than a third of them, own their own home already at between 25 and 35 years old. So don't tell me they'll never own their own home, because they are.
Yeah.
But everybody's convinced, and this is why I did the poll. I did the poll, and everybody thought it was only 15%. It's like, no, it's 35.5%. Do you know several years ago it was 50%?
Really? I thought it would have
Yeah.
been lower.
50% several years ago. But in my time, in the 80s, 50%, over 55% owned their own home between 25 and 35-year-old. That was quite normal. It's only because it's getting a lot more expensive, but there's nothing wrong with renting. Renting is a European thing. People have rented for years, and people in Europe aren't skint. There's some countries that are way beyond us for their, you know, for their health and for their wealth and their well-being and all the rest of it. And the majority of them actually just rent their homes. So where is this thing about you're going to be happy if you own your own home? Potentially, for me, I'd say it's sometimes the beginning and the end for some people who actually take on a mortgage and take on a house because it doesn't suit their needs.
Yeah. No, you're right. And it's like they just dive into it because they think it's what's expected of them.
I talk to my boys about it, about, you know, your first house maybe should be just a buy to let. Don't buy a house. There's no point. You're living here. Why would you then go and buy a house to live in if you're living here and then accumulate all these bills? Your council tax, your repair bills, your mortgage, everything else that comes with it, your insurance and everything, and you're living here free grass in this house. So why would you then go and move? I want my own space. I tell you what, for £1,000 a month, I wouldn't give up my own space. Because I've got my own room and I could do my own thing. I could just go out anytime I want, and it's like I've got my own stuff, my telly in my room and everything. It's like I indoctrinate people now and sit and say, if you're a young person, stay with your parents as long as possible and save as much money and build as much wealth as possible at this point in time, because it will compound towards the end. Remember, I will finish off with this. Your key strategy here, if you're younger, remember the 31 days, compounded up 1 pence. So 1 pence in the first day, to 2 pence, to 4 pence, to 8 pence, to 16 pence. And by the time you've compounded it up after 31 days, it's almost just under £11 million, doubling it every day. £11 million. Imagine if you don't start early. If you started at day 30, then therefore it would only be worth £5 million. So just because you started late, you've lost £5 million by 1 day because you started a day later. That's why it's so important. If you're a young person, you're just starting out for the first time, you need to take advice from people that are successful at it already. You know, there's financial advisors out there. Yes, okay. They're all bound by legislation. Nobody will tell you anything really, other than if you put it in a mortgage and it's a pension is going to accumulate at 5% a year, you'll get this amount. If it's going to accumulate at 7% a year, you'll get this amount. That's all you're getting told.
And that they just stick to that structure and can't really explore.
Of course they can. They're legally bound to stick to that structure. They cannot tell you anything otherwise. Your friends can tell you anything under the legislation because they're your friends. That's why it's got a get out clause in it. So if you've got a friend or an acquaintance or somebody you work with and they're telling you, and you can't go back to them and say, you told me to do this, I'm going to take you to financial ombudsman, because it's like, no. There's a get out of jail clause in there. And I say that get out of jail because it's like Monopoly and all the rest of it, but I'm not really meaning it physically. You get out of jail because there's something criminal about it. No, it's just that's the way it is to take into account your friends that give you advice down the pub when you're having a drink. It's like, oh, I went and bought these shares. It's like, I've lost out as a result of it. Therefore, I'm going to sue you. It's like, no, that doesn't apply to the Financial Services Act or whatever it is now. So get the best advice from the right people. If you're starting out for the first time and you want to build a buy-to-let portfolio, and for God's sake, just follow the financial freedom blueprint. We've got. It's so simple.
Yeah, and I think going with what we spoke about today, it might be a good idea if you're thinking about your child's in their future to do it on the flip side and flip it on its head, rather than have them buy their own property first to live in, think about buy to let and speak to the right people, definitely.
Yeah.
Okay, right, we'll wrap it up there today. That was the Millennium Landlord, and obviously helping your child build their own buy to let earlier on in life than what you may think. So hopefully that was useful. Any questions, obviously, if it's on the rerun things, jump in the comments. Thanks to everybody who's watched today and joined in. And we'll be back next week as usual for the Saturday morning show. And thanks for that, Jim. I'll leave it there and see you later.
Okay, bye-bye.